Imagine this. It's 3 in the morning. The world is asleep. No one is watching. No one is cheering. No one even knows you're awake. But there you are putting in the work day after day, week after week, month after month. While others are dreaming about success, you're building it in silence. While others are making excuses, you're making progress. While others are waiting for motivation, you've already finished. This is the reality of those who truly succeed. They don't wait for the right moment. They don't depend on feelings. They don't need external validation or perfect conditions. They have discovered something that separates them from the 99% who struggle with consistency. They have learned to force themselves to be consistent, not through brute willpower, but through a deeper understanding of what consistency really means. Most people think consistency is about discipline. They think it's about grinding through pain and fighting against their nature. But they're wrong. True consistency isn't about forcing yourself against your will. It's about forcing yourself to become the person who doesn't need to be forced. It's about rewiring your identity so deeply that inconsistency becomes impossible. The people who change the world, who build empires, who transform their lives, they all share one secret. They've mastered the art of forcing themselves to be consistent when no one is watching. They've learned that consistency isn't a skill you develop. It's a choice you make. And once you make that choice, everything changes. This is your blueprint to joining their ranks. This is how you force yourself to be consistent and let your results speak louder than words ever could. Chapter 1. The hidden truth about consistency. Most people have consistency completely backwards. They think consistency means showing up when you feel like it. They think it means being disciplined when motivation strikes. They think it means pushing through when everything is going well. But real consistency, the kind that builds empires and transforms lives, happens in the moments when everything inside you is screaming to quit. Real consistency is showing up when you're exhausted. It's working when you're discouraged. It's continuing when no one believes in you, including yourself. It's the willingness to force yourself forward when every fiber of your being wants to retreat. This isn't about motivation. This isn't about inspiration. This is about making a decision that your future matters more than your current feelings. Think about a river carving through stone. The water doesn't care if the stone is hard. It doesn't wait for the stone to soften. It doesn't need motivation or encouragement. Day after day, year after year, it applies gentle, consistent pressure, and eventually the hardest stone yields. The river doesn't force its way through with violence. It forces its way through with relentless, unwavering consistency. You are that river. Your goals, your dreams, your vision for your life. These are the stones that need to be carved. And the only tool powerful enough to shape them is your willingness to force yourself to be consistent, especially when you don't feel like it. Especially when it's hard, especially when no one is watching. But here's what most people don't understand about forcing yourself to be consistent. It's not about becoming a machine. It's not about suppressing your humanity or ignoring your feelings. It's about recognizing that your feelings are not your master. Your emotions are not your boss. Your momentary desires are not your destiny. You are. When you force yourself to be consistent, you're not fighting against yourself. You're fighting for yourself. You're fighting for the person you're becoming. You're fighting for the life you deserve. You're fighting for the legacy you want to leave. And in that fight, you discover something profound. You discover that you're stronger than you ever imagined. The most successful people in history understood this principle. They knew that consistency isn't about feeling good. It's about doing good. It's not about being motivated. It's about being committed. It's not about waiting for the right moment. It's about making every moment the right moment through the power of consistent action. Consider the greatest athletes in the world. They don't train only when they feel inspired. They train when they're tired. They train when they're sore. They train when they're discouraged. They train when they'd rather be anywhere else. They force themselves to be consistent because they understand that greatness isn't built in moments of high motivation. Greatness is built in moments of low motivation when you choose to show up anyway. This is the first truth you must accept if you want to force yourself to be consistent. Consistency isn't about feelings. It's about choices. It's not about what you want to do in the moment. It's about what you're committed to becoming over time. When you shift from being feeling-driven to being commitment-driven, everything changes. The feeling-driven person waits for inspiration. The commitment-driven person creates it. The feeling-driven person makes excuses. The commitment-driven person makes progress. The feeling-driven person hopes for change. The commitment-driven person forces change through unwavering consistency. But forcing yourself to be consistent requires you to confront some uncomfortable truths about yourself. It requires you to admit that your excuses are just that, excuses. It requires you to acknowledge that your lack of progress isn't because of your circumstances. It's because of your choices. It requires you to take full responsibility for where you are and where you're going. This confrontation with truth is painful, but it's also liberating, because once you accept that you have the power to force yourself to be consistent, you realize you have the power to change everything. You're not a victim of your circumstances. You're not a slave to your feelings. You're not dependent on external motivation. You are the author of your own story, and consistency is your pen. The hidden truth about consistency is that it's not something you find. It's something you create. It's not something that happens to you. It's something you make happen. It's not a gift you're born with. It's a skill you develop through the daily practice of forcing yourself to show up when you don't want to. Every time you force yourself to be consistent when it's hard, you're building a muscle. Every time you choose commitment over comfort, you're strengthening your character. Every time you act in alignment with your goals instead of your feelings, you're becoming the person who deserves the success you're chasing. This is why forcing yourself to be consistent is so powerful. It's not just about achieving your goals. It's about becoming the type of person who achieves goals. It's not just about getting results. It's about developing the character that consistently produces results. It's not just about success. It's about becoming successful. The world is full of people with good intentions. The world is full of people with great ideas. The world is full of people with inspiring dreams. But the world belongs to those who force themselves to be consistent. Those who understand that dreams without consistent action remain dreams forever. Those who realize that the gap between where you are and where you want to be is bridged not by motivation but by daily relentless unwavering consistency. When you force yourself to be consistent, you're making a statement. You're saying that your future is more important than your present comfort. You're declaring that your goals matter more than your momentary feelings. You're announcing to the universe that you're serious about change, serious about growth, serious about becoming everything you're capable of becoming. This is the hidden truth about consistency. It's not about perfection. It's about persistence. It's not about never failing. It's about never stopping. It's not about feeling ready. It's about forcing yourself to be ready through the daily practice of showing up regardless of how you feel. Chapter 2. Why motivation is your enemy. The biggest lie ever told about success is that you need motivation to be consistent. This lie has destroyed more dreams than failure ever could. It has kept more people stuck than any external obstacle. It has created a generation of people waiting for inspiration instead of creating it. And if you believe this lie, you'll spend your entire life waiting for a feeling that never comes consistently enough to build the life you want. Motivation is not your friend. Motivation is your enemy. It's unreliable, unpredictable, and utterly useless when you need it most. Motivation shows up when you're already feeling good. It appears when things are going well. It manifests when you're already inspired. But where is motivation when you're tired? Where is motivation when you're discouraged? Where is motivation when you're facing setbacks? It's nowhere to be found. This is why people who depend on motivation to be consistent never achieve lasting success. They're building their dreams on quicksand. They're trusting their future to something as fickle as the weather. They're waiting for lightning to strike instead of learning how to generate their own electricity. Think about the most consistent people you know. The people who show up every day regardless of circumstances. The people who make progress when others make excuses. Do you think they feel motivated every single day? Do you think they wake up every morning excited and energized? Of course not. They've simply learned the secret that motivation-dependent people never discover. They've learned how to force themselves to be consistent without depending on external or internal inspiration. The truth is, motivation is a luxury you can't afford if you're serious about changing your life. It's like waiting for perfect weather to start a journey. You might wait forever. And even if the perfect conditions arrive, they won't last. The people who reach their destinations don't wait for perfect weather. They learn to travel in all conditions. They force themselves to move forward regardless of what the sky looks like. When you force yourself to be consistent without motivation, something incredible happens. You discover that action creates motivation, not the other way around. You realize that the very act of showing up even when you don't feel like it, generates the energy you thought you needed to show up in the first place. You learn that motivation is not a prerequisite for action. It's a byproduct of action. This revelation changes everything. Instead of waiting for motivation to act, you act to create motivation. Instead of hoping to feel inspired, you inspire yourself through consistent behavior. Instead of being at the mercy of your feelings, you become the master of your emotions, through the power of forced consistency. But here's the deeper truth about why motivation is your enemy. Motivation makes you soft. It makes you dependent. It teaches you to believe that you need external validation or internal excitement to do what needs to be done. It creates a mental framework where action is contingent on feeling, where progress depends on mood, where success is subject to emotional weather patterns. This dependency is toxic because life doesn't care about your motivation levels. Challenges don't wait for you to feel inspired before they arrive. Opportunities don't pause until you're emotionally ready. Success doesn't delay itself until you're motivated. Life happens regardless of how you feel about it. And if you're not willing to force yourself to be consistent without motivation, you'll miss most of what life has to offer. The most dangerous aspect of motivation dependency is that it creates a pattern of stop and start behavior. You make progress when you're motivated, then stop when the motivation fades. You start strong when inspiration strikes, then quit when it leaves. You commit when you're excited, then abandon when excitement wanes. This pattern doesn't just prevent success, it actively destroys it by creating a cycle of inconsistency that becomes harder to break with each repetition. Consider the person trying to build a business. They start with incredible motivation. They work long hours, make sacrifices, push through obstacles. But then reality sets in. The initial excitement fades. The challenges multiply. The progress slows. And because they've built their work ethic on motivation, they begin to struggle. They start making excuses. They begin skipping days. They tell themselves they'll start again when they feel more inspired. And slowly, inevitably, they quit. Now consider the person who understands that motivation is the enemy. They start their business with a different mindset. They expect the motivation to fade. They plan for the excitement to diminish. They know that feelings are temporary, but consistency is what builds lasting success. So when the motivation disappears, they don't panic. They don't stop. They force themselves to continue because they've built their foundation on commitment, not emotion. This is the difference between those who succeed and those who fail. Successful people have learned to divorce action from feeling. They've discovered that forcing yourself to be consistent is not about ignoring your emotions. It's about not being controlled by them. It's about recognizing that your feelings are information, not instructions. They tell you how you're doing, not what you should be doing. When you force yourself to be consistent without motivation, you're training yourself for the real world. Because the real world doesn't provide motivation. The real world provides challenges, obstacles, setbacks, and difficulties. If you can only function when you're motivated, you can only function in artificial temporary conditions. But if you can force yourself to be consistent regardless of motivation, you can function in any condition life throws at you. This training makes you antifragile. Not just resilient, but actually stronger because of challenges. When motivation-dependent people face setbacks, they crumble because their foundation was built on feelings, not principles. But when commitment-driven people face setbacks, they grow stronger because their foundation is built on the unshakable principle of forced consistency. The process of forcing yourself to be consistent without motivation also reveals who you really are. When motivation is present, anyone can work hard. When inspiration strikes, anyone can make progress. But when you're tired, discouraged, facing obstacles, dealing with setbacks, and you still force yourself to be consistent, you discover your true character. You realize that you're not dependent on external circumstances for internal strength. This self-discovery is transformational because it shifts your identity from being someone who needs perfect conditions to someone who creates perfect outcomes regardless of conditions. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstance and start seeing yourself as a creator of results. You stop depending on the world to provide motivation and start generating your own momentum through unwavering consistency. The enemy of motivation is not just that it's unreliable. The enemy of motivation is that it teaches you to be unreliable. It conditions you to believe that your behavior should fluctuate based on your feelings. It creates a mental model where consistency is optional, where commitment is conditional, where follow-through depends on feeling through. But when you force yourself to be consistent without motivation, you're sending a different message to your subconscious mind. You're telling yourself that your word matters more than your feelings. You're declaring that your commitments are non-negotiable. You're programming yourself to be reliable regardless of circumstances. And this programming becomes the foundation for every success you'll ever achieve. This is why forcing yourself to be consistent when motivation is absent is the most important skill you can develop. It's not just about getting things done. It's about becoming the type of person who gets things done. It's not just about achieving specific goals. It's about developing the character that consistently achieves goals. It's not just about success. It's about becoming successful at the deepest level. The beautiful irony is that when you learn to force yourself to be consistent without motivation, you actually become more motivated than motivation-dependent people ever are because you've learned to generate your own energy through action. You've discovered that the very act of forcing yourself to show up creates the feelings that others wait for. You've realized that motivation isn't something you find. It's something you build through the daily practice of forced consistency. Chapter 3. The Identity Revolution. The most profound shift that happens when you force yourself to be consistent isn't in your results. It's in your identity. Most people try to change their behavior while keeping their identity intact. They want different outcomes while remaining the same person. But this approach is fundamentally flawed because behavior flows from identity, not the other way around. If you want to force yourself to be consistent, you don't just need to change what you do. You need to change who you are. Your identity is the story you tell yourself about who you are. It's the collection of beliefs, habits, and patterns that define your character. And here's the crucial truth most people miss. Your identity is not fixed. It's not permanent. It's not determined by your past or your circumstances. Your identity is something you choose, something you create, something you can revolutionize through the power of forced consistency. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you believe yourself to be. When you force yourself to be consistent, even when you don't feel like it, you're voting for a new identity. You're telling yourself that you're the type of person who follows through. You're declaring that you're someone who keeps commitments. You're proving that you're reliable, disciplined, and committed to growth. Most people wait for identity change to happen to them. They hope that success will make them feel successful. They believe that achievement will make them achievers. They think that reaching their goals will transform them into goal-oriented people. But this is backwards thinking. Identity change doesn't happen after success. Identity change creates success. When you force yourself to be consistent before you feel like a consistent person, you're engaging in what could be called identity hacking. You're using behavior to rewire your self-concept. You're using actions to reprogram your beliefs about who you are. And this process is incredibly powerful because it creates a positive feedback loop that accelerates your transformation. Think about someone who sees themselves as lazy. Every time they skip a workout, they're reinforcing that identity. Every time they procrastinate, they're strengthening their belief that they're not disciplined. Every time they make excuses, they're voting for the person they don't want to be. Their identity becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that keeps them stuck in patterns they desperately want to break. But when this same person forces themselves to be consistent even in small ways, everything begins to change. When they force themselves to work out even when they don't feel like it, they're casting a vote for being disciplined. When they force themselves to complete tasks even when they want to procrastinate, they're reinforcing an identity of reliability. When they force themselves to show up even when they want to make excuses, they're becoming the person they want to be. This identity revolution doesn't happen overnight. It happens through the accumulation of small consistent actions that compound over time. Each time you force yourself to be consistent, you're adding evidence to a new story about who you are. You're building a case for your transformation. You're proving to yourself that you're capable of change, growth, and sustained effort. The most beautiful aspect of this process is that it creates what psychologists call identity momentum. The more you act like the person you want to become, the more you believe you are that person. The more you believe you are that person, the easier it becomes to act like that person. This momentum builds on itself until forcing yourself to be consistent stops feeling like force and starts feeling like nature. But here's what makes this transformation so powerful. When your identity aligns with your actions, consistency becomes effortless. You don't have to force yourself to be consistent when being consistent is simply who you are. You don't have to fight against your nature when consistency is your nature. You don't have to rely on willpower when your willpower has been replaced by identity power. Consider the difference between someone who forces themselves to exercise and someone who identifies as an athlete. The first person has to overcome internal resistance every time they want to work out. They have to convince themselves, motivate themselves, and push themselves to take action. But the athlete doesn't have this internal conflict. Working out isn't something they have to force themselves to do. It's something they do because it's who they are. This is the power of identity revolution. When you successfully shift your identity through forced consistency, you eliminate internal resistance. You stop fighting against yourself and start aligning with yourself. You stop having to overcome your nature and start expressing your nature. You stop forcing yourself to be consistent and start being consistent because that's simply who you've become. The process of identity revolution through forced consistency requires you to become very intentional about the story you tell yourself. Instead of saying I'm trying to be more disciplined, you say I am disciplined. Instead of saying I'm working on being consistent, you say I am consistent. Instead of saying I hope to become successful, you say I am successful and my consistency proves it. This might feel artificial at first. It might seem like you're lying to yourself or engaging in positive thinking that's disconnected from reality. But you're not lying. You're leading. You're not denying your current situation. You're creating your future reality. You're not ignoring where you are. You're choosing where you're going. The language you use to describe yourself is incredibly powerful because it shapes your thoughts and your thoughts shape your actions and your actions shape your results. When you start speaking about yourself as someone who is already consistent, you begin to think like someone who is consistent. And thinking like a consistent person makes it easier to act like a consistent person. But the identity revolution goes deeper than just changing your self-talk. It requires you to start making decisions from your new identity. Instead of asking what would someone like me do, you ask what would a consistently successful person do. Instead of acting from your current limitations, you act from your future potential. Instead of being constrained by who you've been, you're liberated by who you're becoming. This shift in decision is transformational because it breaks you out of old patterns. Your past identity was created by past decisions. And if you keep making decisions from your past identity, you'll keep creating your past reality. But when you start making decisions from your future identity, you begin creating your future reality today. The most profound aspect of the identity revolution is that it changes not just how you see yourself, but how others see you. When you consistently act from your new identity, people begin to respond to you differently. They start treating you like the person you're becoming instead of the person you used to be. This external validation reinforces your internal transformation and accelerates your identity shift. But perhaps the most important element of identity revolution is understanding that it's not about perfection. It's about direction. You don't have to be perfectly consistent to identify as a consistent person. You just have to be more consistent than you were yesterday. You don't have to never fail to identify as successful. You just have to get back up every time you fall. The identity revolution is about becoming someone who forces themselves to be consistent until consistency becomes natural. It's about choosing to act like the person you want to become until acting that way becomes who you are. It's about understanding that identity isn't about where you start. It's about where you're going and your willingness to act from that destination before you arrive. When you undergo this identity revolution, Forcing yourself to be consistent stops being a struggle and starts being an expression. It stops being something you have to do and starts being something you get to do. It stops being about discipline and starts being about identity. And when consistency becomes part of your identity, there's no limit to what you can achieve. Chapter 4. The Compound Effect of Forced Consistency. There's a moment in every person's journey when they realize that success isn't about making massive changes overnight. It's about making small, seemingly insignificant choices every single day. It's about understanding that forcing yourself to be consistent in tiny ways creates results that appear magical but are actually mathematical. This is the compound effect of forced consistency. And it's the secret that separates those who achieve extraordinary results from those who struggle with ordinary ones. Most people dramatically underestimate the power of small, consistent actions because they don't see immediate results. They force themselves to be consistent for a few days or weeks, don't see dramatic changes, and conclude that their efforts aren't working. But this is like planting a seed and expecting a tree the next day. The most powerful growth happens beneath the surface, invisible to the casual observer, building momentum that will eventually burst into view. When you force yourself to be consistent, you're not just taking action in the present moment. You're making an investment in compound returns that will pay dividends for years to come. Every small action builds on the previous one. Every consistent choice creates momentum for the next one. Every day you force yourself to show up, you're not just achieving that day's goal. You're building the habit, the identity, and the momentum that will make future consistency easier and more powerful. Think about the person who forces themselves to read just 10 pages every day. It doesn't seem like much. On any individual day, the impact is almost negligible, but over the course of a year, that's over 3,600 pages. That's approximately 12 full-length books. That's a completely transformed knowledge base, expanded vocabulary, improved focus, and enhanced critical thinking skills. All from the simple act of forcing yourself to be consistent with something that takes less than 20 minutes a day. But the compound effect goes far beyond just the accumulation of small actions. When you force yourself to be consistent, you're also compounding your self-confidence. Every time you keep a commitment to yourself, you're proving that you're trustworthy. Every time you follow through when you don't feel like it, you're building evidence that you're reliable. Every time you show up when it's hard, you're reinforcing the belief that you're capable of extraordinary things. This confidence compounds just like interest in a bank account. The more evidence you accumulate that you're someone who forces themselves to be consistent, the stronger your belief becomes in your ability to achieve anything you set your mind to. And this belief becomes a powerful force that makes future consistency easier because you're operating from a place of proven capability rather than hoped for potential. The compound effect of forced consistency also extends to your reputation. People begin to see you as someone who follows through. They start to view you as reliable, disciplined, and committed. Opportunities begin to flow to you because others know they can count on you. Your network expands because people want to associate with those who demonstrate consistency. Your influence grows because consistency is leadership in action. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of the compound effect is how it transforms your relationship with challenges. When you've been forcing yourself to be consistent for months or years, obstacles stop feeling overwhelming. You've built up a reservoir of evidence that you can handle difficult situations. You've proven to yourself repeatedly that you can push through when things get hard. You've developed what could be called challenge immunity, where difficulties become opportunities to demonstrate your consistency rather than threats to your progress. This transformation in how you perceive challenges is profound because it eliminates one of the biggest barriers to sustained success, the fear of difficulty. Most people avoid consistency because they're afraid of the effort required. They're intimidated by the thought of showing up every day, especially when they don't feel like it. But when you've experienced the compound effect of forced consistency, you realize that the effort becomes easier over time, not harder. The mathematical reality of compound consistency is that small improvements accumulate exponentially, not linearly. If you improve by just 1% every day, you're not just 1% better at the end of the year. You're 37 times better. This is because each day's improvement builds on all the previous day's improvements. The effect compounds on itself, creating results that seem impossible to those who don't understand the power of consistent forced action. Consider the athlete who forces themselves to practice just 30 minutes every day. Each individual practice session might produce only marginal improvement, but over months and years those marginal improvements compound into mastery. The consistency creates muscle memory, improved technique, enhanced endurance, and deep expertise. What started as forced practice becomes natural excellence. And what felt like sacrifice becomes the source of extraordinary capability. The compound effect also works on a neurological level. When you force yourself to be consistent, you're literally rewiring your brain. You're strengthening neural pathways associated with discipline, follow-through, and persistence. You're weakening pathways associated with procrastination, excuses, and giving up. Over time, consistency becomes your brain's default setting rather than something you have to consciously choose. This neurological transformation is why forcing yourself to be consistent gets easier over time rather than harder. Your brain adapts to your behavior patterns. What initially requires conscious effort and willpower eventually becomes automatic and effortless. You've programmed yourself to be consistent at the deepest level, and this programming operates even when you're not consciously thinking about it, but the compound effect of forced consistency extends beyond personal benefits. It creates ripple effects that impact everyone around you. Your consistency inspires others to be more consistent. Your discipline encourages others to be more disciplined. Your commitment motivates others to follow through on their own goals. You become a living example of what's possible when someone decides to force themselves to be consistent regardless of how they feel. These ripple effects often create opportunities and connections that wouldn't have existed otherwise. People are drawn to consistency because it's rare. They want to partner with consistent people. Invest in consistent people and learn from consistent people. Your forced consistency becomes a magnet that attracts resources, relationships, and opportunities that accelerate your progress even further. The most beautiful aspect of the compound effect is that it's available to everyone. It doesn't matter where you start. It doesn't matter what your current situation is. It doesn't matter what mistakes you've made in the past. The compound effect of forced consistency is a universal principle that works for anyone willing to apply it. You simply have to start where you are with what you have and commit to showing up consistently over time. The key to maximizing the compound effect is understanding that it requires patience and faith. You have to trust the process even when you can't see the results. You have to believe in the mathematics of consistency even when the evidence isn't yet visible. You have to force yourself to continue even when progress seems slow or non-existent. This is where most people fail. They start the process of forced consistency but quit before the compound effect has time to work its magic. They plant the seed but dig it up before it has time to grow. They begin building momentum but stop before reaching the tipping point where consistency becomes effortless and results become exponential. But when you persist through this phase, when you continue to force yourself to be consistent even when you can't see immediate results, you enter a realm of possibility that most people never experience. You discover that the compound effect doesn't just improve your results. It transforms your entire life. You become someone who doesn't just achieve goals. You become someone who consistently achieves goals. And that's a completely different way of existing in the world. The compound effect of forced consistency is not just about getting more done. It's about becoming more. It's about transforming from someone who hopes for success into someone who creates success through the steady accumulation of consistent actions over time. And once you've experienced this transformation, you'll never go back to depending on motivation, inspiration, or perfect conditions ever again. Chapter 5. Building systems that force success. The secret to forcing yourself to be consistent isn't willpower. It's systems. Most people try to change their lives through sheer force of will. But willpower is like a muscle that gets tired with use. Systems, on the other hand, are like machines that operate regardless of how you feel. When you build the right systems, consistency becomes automatic, inevitable, and effortless. You stop having to force yourself to be consistent because your systems force consistency for you. A system is simply a repeatable process that produces predictable results. It's a framework that guides your behavior without requiring constant decision-making. It's a structure that makes the right choices easier and the wrong choices harder. When you build systems that force success, you remove the element of choice from consistency. You don't have to decide whether to be consistent. Your systems make consistency the path of least resistance. Think about the most consistent things in your life. You probably brush your teeth every day without thinking about it. You likely shower regularly without internal debate. You probably eat meals at roughly the same times without intense motivation. These behaviors are consistent not because you have incredible willpower, but because you have systems that make them automatic. You've created environmental triggers, established routines, and built habits that guide your behavior without conscious effort. The same principle applies to any area where you want to force yourself to be consistent. Instead of relying on willpower to make the right choices, you create systems that make the right choices inevitable. Instead of depending on motivation to take action, you build structures that guide you toward action regardless of how you feel. Instead of hoping to remember to be consistent, you create reminders, triggers, and processes that make forgetting impossible. The foundation of any system that forces success is environmental design. Your environment is constantly influencing your behavior, often in ways you don't consciously recognize. When you intentionally design your environment to support consistency, you eliminate the friction that causes most people to quit. You make the behaviors you want easier to perform and the behaviors you want to avoid harder to perform. If you want to force yourself to be consistent with exercise, you don't just rely on willpower to get to the gym. You lay out your workout clothes the night before so they're the first thing you see in the morning. You pack your gym bag and put it by the door so you trip over it on your way out. You choose a gym that's on your route to work so it's convenient rather than an extra stop. You schedule your workouts like appointments, so they become non-negotiable parts of your day. These environmental modifications might seem small, but they're incredibly powerful because they reduce the number of decisions you have to make and the amount of resistance you have to overcome. Every barrier you remove, every trigger you create, every convenience you build into your system makes consistency more likely and inconsistency less likely. The second critical component of systems that force success is routine automation. Routines eliminate decision fatigue by making behavior automatic. When you have an established routine, you don't have to think about what to do next. You don't have to debate whether to take action. You don't have to overcome internal resistance because your routine carries you forward without conscious intervention. The most successful people in the world are often the most routine-oriented people. They wake up at the same time every day. They follow the same morning routine. They work in the same patterns. They exercise at the same times. This isn't because they lack creativity or spontaneity. It's because they understand that routines create consistency. And consistency creates extraordinary results. When you build routines that force consistency, you're essentially programming yourself for success. You're creating automated behaviors that align with your goals. You're removing the daily negotiation between what you want to do and what you should do. You're making the path to your goals so well established that following it becomes as natural as breathing. But the most powerful systems that force success include what could be called commitment devices. These are structures that make it costly or impossible to be inconsistent. They create consequences for quitting and rewards for continuing. They align your immediate interests with your long-term goals, making consistency the only rational choice. A commitment device might be as simple as telling others about your goals, creating social pressure to follow through. It might be investing money in your success, creating financial motivation to continue. It might be signing up for events or competitions that require you to be ready by a certain date, creating deadline pressure that forces consistency. The key is to make the cost of inconsistency higher than the cost of consistency. One of the most effective commitment devices is what psychologists call implementation intentions. Instead of just setting goals, you create specific if-then plans for exactly when and where you'll take action. Instead of saying, "I'll work out more," you say, "If it's Monday, Wednesday, or Friday at 6 a.m., then I will go to the gym." This specificity removes ambiguity and creates a trigger that automatically initiates the behavior you want. Implementation intentions are powerful because they bridge the gap between intention and action. They eliminate the moment of decision that derails most people. When the specified conditions are met, the behavior happens automatically because you've already decided what to do. You've removed choice from the equation and replaced it with systematic response. The most sophisticated systems that force success also include feedback loops that provide regular information about your progress. These loops help you stay on track by making your consistency visible and measurable. They create awareness of whether your system is working and allow you to make adjustments before small problems become big failures. Feedback loops might include tracking your daily actions on a calendar, measuring key metrics weekly, or reviewing your progress monthly. The specific method matters less than the consistency of measurement. The goal is to create visibility into your behavior so you can see patterns, identify obstacles, and celebrate progress. When you can see your consistency, you're more likely to maintain it. But perhaps the most important element of systems that force success is simplicity. Complex systems fail because they require too much mental energy to maintain. Simple systems succeed because they're easy to follow even when willpower is low, motivation is absent, and circumstances are challenging. The best system is not the most sophisticated one. It's the one you'll actually use consistently over time. This means starting small and building gradually. Instead of trying to create a perfect system immediately, you focus on establishing one simple consistent behavior. Once that behavior becomes automatic, you add another element. You build your system piece by piece, allowing each component to become habitual before adding complexity. The power of systems that force success is that they work regardless of your personality type, your current situation, or your past failures. They don't require you to become a different person. They just require you to build structures that make your desired behavior easier than your undesired behavior. They transform the challenge of consistency from a matter of willpower into a matter of engineering. When you have systems that force success, consistency stops being a daily struggle and becomes a natural result of your environment, routines, and structures. You don't have to force yourself to be consistent because your systems force consistency for you. You don't have to rely on motivation because your systems operate independently of your feelings. You don't have to depend on willpower because your systems make the right choices automatic. The most beautiful aspect of building systems that force success is that they compound over time. As your systems become more refined and your routines become more automatic, consistency becomes easier and more natural. What started as forced behavior becomes effortless behavior. What began as systematic discipline becomes natural character. What initially required external structure becomes internal strength. This transformation from external systems to internal consistency is the ultimate goal. You build systems that force success until forcing yourself to be consistent becomes unnecessary because consistency has become who you are. The systems don't disappear. They become invisible, operating in the background to support the person you've become through the power of structured, systematic, unavoidable consistency. Chapter 6. The Mental Warfare of Consistency. Every time you force yourself to be consistent, you're engaged in a war. Not a war against external enemies, but a war against the part of your mind that wants to keep you exactly where you are. This part of your mind has a name. It's called resistance. And it's the most sophisticated opponent you'll ever face. It knows your weaknesses. It speaks in your voice. And it has one primary mission: to prevent you from changing. Resistance is not your enemy because it's evil. It's your enemy because it's effective. It has evolved over millions of years to keep you safe, comfortable, and alive. But safety, comfort, and survival are not the same as growth, achievement, and excellence. Resistance doesn't care about your dreams. It cares about keeping you in familiar territory, even if that territory is limiting your potential. When you decide to force yourself to be consistent, resistance immediately activates. It whispers that you can start tomorrow. It reminds you of past failures. It magnifies every obstacle and minimizes every opportunity. It makes the couch more comfortable and the gym more intimidating. It turns simple tasks into mountains and important goals into impossibilities. The mistake most people make is trying to eliminate resistance. They think that successful people don't experience these internal battles. They believe that consistent people have somehow overcome the voice that says quit, rest, delay, avoid. But this is fundamentally wrong. Successful people experience just as much resistance as unsuccessful people. The difference is they've learned to work with resistance instead of being paralyzed by it. Understanding resistance is the first step to defeating it. Resistance is not a character flaw. It's a feature of human psychology. It's not a sign of weakness. It's evidence that you're attempting something meaningful. The stronger the resistance, the more important the thing you're avoiding. Resistance is actually a compass pointing toward what you most need to do. When you force yourself to be consistent despite resistance, you're not just accomplishing tasks. You're training your mind to function under pressure. You're teaching yourself that feelings are not facts and thoughts are not commands. You're developing the mental strength to act in alignment with your goals regardless of what your internal weather looks like. The most dangerous form of resistance is rationalization. This is when your mind creates seemingly logical reasons to avoid consistency. It tells you that you need to wait for better circumstances. It convinces you that inconsistency is actually strategic. It makes procrastination feel like planning and avoidance feel like preparation. These rationalizations are seductive because they contain elements of truth. Maybe you could benefit from better planning. Perhaps waiting might create better conditions. But resistance uses these partial truths to create complete lies. It takes reasonable concerns and amplifies them into paralysis. It transforms legitimate considerations into illegitimate delays. The antidote to rationalization is simplicity. When you complicate your approach to consistency, you create more opportunities for resistance to interfere. But when you keep your commitment simple and clear, resistance has fewer places to hide. Instead of elaborate plans that can be questioned, you create straightforward commitments that can only be kept or broken. Another weapon resistance uses is perfectionism. It tells you that if you can't do something perfectly, you shouldn't do it at all. It makes you believe that inconsistent progress is worthless progress. It convinces you that missing one day means you've failed completely. This all-or-nothing thinking is designed to make you quit at the first sign of imperfection. But forcing yourself to be consistent is not about perfection. It's about persistence. It's not about never falling down. It's about always getting back up. When you understand this, perfectionism loses its power to paralyze you. You realize that consistency is measured over months and years, not days and weeks. The mental warfare of consistency also involves what psychologists call the planning fallacy. This is the tendency to underestimate the time, effort, and obstacles involved in achieving goals. Resistance exploits this by making you overcommit initially, knowing that when reality hits, you'll become discouraged and quit. The solution is pessimistic planning. Instead of estimating how long something will take, double it. Instead of assuming everything will go smoothly, plan for obstacles. Instead of expecting motivation to carry you through, prepare for the days when motivation is nowhere to be found. When you plan for difficulty, resistance can't use surprise and disappointment to derail your consistency. Perhaps the most sophisticated strategy resistance employs is disguising itself as logic. It tells you that consistency is overrated. It points to successful people who seem inconsistent. It argues that flexibility is more important than rigidity. It makes inconsistency sound like wisdom and consistency sound like stubbornness. But this logic is flawed because it confuses tactics with strategy. Successful people might be flexible in their methods, but they're incredibly consistent in their commitment to their goals. They might change how they pursue success, but they never stop pursuing it. Their apparent inconsistency is actually a deeper form of consistency. The key to winning the mental warfare of consistency is recognizing that resistance is not going away. It's not something you overcome once and forget about. It's something you face every single day, and your success depends on your willingness to face it consistently. This isn't discouraging, it's liberating. Because once you accept that resistance is permanent, you stop waiting for it to disappear and start developing the skills to work despite it. Every time you force yourself to be consistent in the face of resistance, you're building what could be called resistance tolerance. You're increasing your capacity to function effectively, even when your mind is telling you to quit. You're developing immunity to the thoughts and feelings that stop most people from achieving their goals. This tolerance doesn't mean you stop feeling resistance. It means resistance stops controlling you. You feel the pull toward comfort and choose growth anyway. You hear the voice that says quit and keep going anyway. You experience the desire to delay and take action anyway. You become someone who can be relied upon, especially by yourself, regardless of internal weather conditions. Chapter 7. The Power of Micro-Commitments. The biggest mistake people make when trying to force themselves to be consistent is thinking big. They set massive goals, create elaborate plans, and expect themselves to transform overnight. But consistency isn't built through grand gestures. It's built through micro-commitments so small they seem almost ridiculous to break. A micro-commitment is a promise to yourself that's so tiny it requires almost no willpower to keep. It's doing one push-up instead of a full workout. It's writing one sentence instead of a full page. It's reading one paragraph instead of a full chapter. These commitments seem insignificant, but they're actually the foundation upon which all lasting consistency is built. The power of micro-commitments lies in their psychological impact. When you keep a promise to yourself, no matter how small, you're building trust with yourself. You're proving that your word matters, that your commitments are non-negotiable, and that you're someone who follows through. This self-trust is the foundation of all future consistency. Most people dramatically underestimate the importance of self-trust. They break small promises to themselves constantly and wonder why they struggle with big commitments. They hit the snooze button and then expect themselves to wake up early for important opportunities. They skip small workouts and then wonder why they can't maintain exercise routines. They postpone minor tasks and then struggle with major projects. But when you start keeping micro-commitments religiously, everything changes. You begin to see yourself as someone who does what they say they'll do. You develop confidence in your ability to follow through. You create a track record of reliability that makes larger commitments feel achievable rather than overwhelming. The beauty of micro-commitments is that they're designed to be kept even on your worst days. When you're sick, stressed, tired, or overwhelmed, you can still do one push-up. You can still write one sentence. You can still read one paragraph. These tiny actions maintain your consistency streak and preserve the identity you're building as someone who forces themselves to be consistent. This is crucial because consistency is about momentum and momentum is fragile. When you break a consistency streak, you don't just lose progress. You lose the psychological momentum that makes future consistency easier. But when you maintain micro-commitments, you preserve this momentum even when circumstances prevent you from doing more. Micro-commitments also work because they eliminate the activation energy problem. The hardest part of most tasks isn't completing them, it's starting them. But when your commitment is to do something tiny, starting becomes almost effortless. And once you start, you often find yourself doing more than the minimum. You do one push-up and end up doing 10. You write one sentence and end up writing a paragraph. This phenomenon known as the Zeigarnik effect happens because our brains have a natural tendency to complete tasks once they're started. The micro-commitment gets you over the activation energy hump and natural momentum carries you forward. You're not forcing yourself to do more. You're allowing yourself to do more. But the real power of micro-commitments becomes apparent over time. Each tiny action compounds with the others. One push-up becomes a habit of daily movement. One sentence becomes a habit of daily writing. One paragraph becomes a habit of daily learning. These habits create the foundation for larger achievements without the resistance that comes with trying to change everything at once. Micro-commitments also serve as a testing ground for your consistency systems. If you can't maintain a commitment to do one push-up every day, you definitely can't maintain a commitment to a full workout routine. But if you can maintain micro-commitments consistently, you have proof that your systems work and evidence that larger commitments are achievable. The key to effective micro-commitments is making them ridiculously small. Your ego will want to make them larger. Because tiny commitments don't feel significant. But significance isn't the goal. Consistency is the goal. And consistency is built through actions so small that resistance can't organize against them effectively. When you force yourself to honor micro-commitments, you're training your brain to associate commitment keeping with ease rather than struggle. You're programming yourself to see follow-through as natural rather than exceptional. You're building neural pathways that make consistency feel automatic rather than forced. This training is incredibly valuable because it prepares you for larger challenges. When you've proven to yourself that you can keep small commitments consistently, you develop confidence in your ability to keep larger commitments. You have evidence that you're reliable, disciplined, and trustworthy. This evidence makes forcing yourself to be consistent feel less like force and more like character expression. The most successful people understand this principle intuitively. They don't rely on motivation to keep massive commitments. They build systems of micro-commitments that create unstoppable momentum toward their goals. They understand that consistency isn't about doing everything perfectly. It's about doing something imperfectly but persistently. Micro-commitments also serve as insurance against perfectionism when your only requirement is to do something tiny. You can't use perfectionism as an excuse to avoid action. You can't tell yourself that you need perfect conditions to do one push-up. You can't argue that you need more time to write one sentence. The commitment is so small that excuses become obviously ridiculous. This elimination of excuses is powerful because excuses are the primary tool resistance uses to prevent consistency. When you remove the ability to rationalize inaction, you remove resistance's most effective weapon. You force yourself to either keep your commitment or consciously choose to break it. And most people, when faced with this clear choice, choose to keep the commitment because breaking it feels unnecessarily self-destructive. The compound effect of micro-commitments creates what could be called consistency momentum. Each small action builds energy for the next action. Each kept commitment increases your capacity for future commitments. Each tiny success creates appetite for larger successes. This momentum eventually reaches a tipping point where consistency becomes self-sustaining rather than self-forcing. Chapter 8. Handling setbacks without breaking. The moment you commit to forcing yourself to be consistent, life will test you. Not because the universe is against you, but because setbacks are an inevitable part of any meaningful journey. The difference between those who succeed and those who fail isn't whether they experience setbacks, it's how they respond to them. Learning to handle setbacks without breaking isn't just about resilience. It's about understanding that setbacks are actually opportunities to strengthen your consistency muscle. Most people treat setbacks as evidence that they're not cut out for consistency. They miss one workout and conclude they're not athletic. They skip one day of their routine and decide they lack discipline. They encounter one obstacle and determine their goals are unrealistic. But this response reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of what consistency actually means. Consistency isn't about perfection. It's about resilience. It's not about never falling down. It's about always getting back up. It's not about avoiding setbacks. It's about recovering from them quickly and completely. When you understand this, setbacks stop being threats to your consistency and start being opportunities to demonstrate it. The key to handling setbacks without breaking is preparation. You have to expect them before they happen. You have to plan for them before they arrive. You have to build recovery strategies before you need them. This isn't pessimism, it's realism. And this realism makes you antifragile rather than just resilient. When setbacks surprise you, they can derail your consistency for weeks or months. But when you expect them, they become just another part of the process. You're not shocked by their arrival. You're not discouraged by their presence. You're not defeated by their impact. You're simply implementing your pre-planned response and getting back on track. The first step in setback preparation is understanding the different types of setbacks you'll face. External setbacks are things that happen to you. Illness, emergencies, unexpected obligations, and environmental changes. Internal setbacks are things that happen within you. Loss of motivation, emotional turbulence, mental fatigue and decision paralysis. Both types are inevitable, but they require different response strategies for external setbacks. The solution is flexibility within structure. You maintain your commitment to consistency while adapting your methods to current circumstances. If you can't go to the gym because it's closed, you work out at home. If you can't write your usual amount because of interruptions, you write less, but you still write. The method changes, but the commitment remains. For internal setbacks, the solution is action despite feeling. You don't wait for motivation to return. You don't postpone action until you feel better. You force yourself to take small actions that rebuild momentum. You might not feel like doing a full workout, but you do something. You might not feel like writing, but you write one sentence. Action creates the very feelings you think you need to have before taking action. The most dangerous response to setbacks is what psychologists call the what the hell effect. This happens when people use one failure as justification for complete abandonment. They miss one workout and stop exercising entirely. They break their diet once and eat poorly for weeks. They miss one day of their routine and abandon the routine completely. This response is dangerous because it treats consistency as binary rather than cumulative. It assumes that one mistake erases all previous progress. But consistency isn't about maintaining a perfect streak. It's about maintaining a strong average. Missing one day out of 30 is still 97% consistency. Missing 2 days out of 30 is still 93% consistency. These are extraordinary success rates, not failures. The antidote to the what the hell effect is the bounce back rule. This rule states that when you miss one day, you absolutely cannot miss the next day. When you break your consistency once, you must force yourself to resume immediately. You don't allow one mistake to become 2 mistakes. You don't permit one exception to become a pattern. This rule is powerful because it prevents single setbacks from becoming consistency breaks. It treats each day as independent rather than dependent on previous days. It allows you to maintain high consistency rates even when perfect consistency is impossible. Most importantly, it preserves the identity and momentum that make future consistency easier. Another crucial element of handling setbacks is what could be called emotional regulation. Setbacks often trigger negative emotions like guilt, shame, frustration, and disappointment. These emotions are natural, but they're also dangerous because they can create downward spirals that destroy consistency entirely. The key is to feel these emotions without being controlled by them. You acknowledge the disappointment without letting it dictate your actions. You experience the frustration without using it as an excuse to quit. You feel the guilt without allowing it to prevent future action. Emotions are information, not instructions. Perhaps the most important skill for handling setbacks is reframing. Instead of seeing setbacks as evidence of failure, you see them as opportunities for growth. Instead of viewing obstacles as problems, you see them as challenges to overcome. Instead of treating mistakes as character flaws, you see them as learning experiences. This reframing isn't about positive thinking or denial. It's about choosing interpretations that serve your long-term success rather than your short-term comfort. Setbacks are going to happen regardless of how you interpret them, but your interpretation will determine whether they strengthen your consistency or destroy it. The most powerful reframe is to see setbacks as consistency training. Every time you handle a setback well, you're building your capacity to handle future setbacks. Every time you recover quickly from a mistake, you're proving to yourself that mistakes aren't fatal. Every time you get back on track after getting derailed, you're reinforcing the identity of someone who forces themselves to be consistent regardless of circumstances. This training effect compounds over time. The more setbacks you handle successfully, the more confidence you develop in your ability to handle future setbacks. You stop fearing obstacles because you have evidence that you can overcome them. You stop dreading challenges because you have proof that challenges make you stronger. Advanced practitioners of consistency develop what could be called setback immunity. They've handled so many obstacles successfully that new obstacles feel routine rather than threatening. They've bounced back from so many failures that failure feels temporary rather than permanent. They've recovered from so many mistakes that mistakes feel educational rather than destructive. This immunity doesn't mean they stop experiencing setbacks. It means setbacks stop defining their experience. They become background noise rather than foreground drama. They're acknowledged, addressed, and overcome without derailing the larger consistency project. The ultimate goal is to reach a point where your consistency is stronger than any setback you might face, where your commitment is deeper than any obstacle you might encounter, where your identity as someone who forces themselves to be consistent is so strong that temporary failures can't shake it permanently. Chapter 9. The Discipline of Delayed Gratification. At the heart of forcing yourself to be consistent lies one of the most challenging human skills, delayed gratification. This is the ability to resist immediate rewards in favor of later greater rewards. It's choosing the satisfaction of long-term achievement over the comfort of short-term pleasure. Every time you force yourself to be consistent, you're practicing this discipline. And every time you practice this discipline, you're building the foundation for extraordinary success. Delayed gratification is difficult because our brains are wired for immediate survival, not long-term optimization. The part of your brain that craves instant pleasure is ancient, powerful, and persuasive. It doesn't care about your future goals. It cares about immediate comfort, safety, and satisfaction. This is why forcing yourself to be consistent often feels like swimming against a powerful current. But this resistance is exactly what makes delayed gratification so valuable. It's a skill that separates the successful from the unsuccessful, the achievers from the dreamers, the consistent from the sporadic. When you develop the ability to consistently choose long-term benefits over short-term pleasures, you gain access to opportunities and outcomes that are invisible to those who can't delay gratification. The famous Stanford marshmallow experiment demonstrated this principle decades ago. Children who could resist eating one marshmallow to receive 2 marshmallows later showed significantly better life outcomes years down the road. They had better academic performance, lower rates of addiction, stronger relationships, and higher overall life satisfaction. The ability to delay gratification predicted success better than intelligence, talent, or background. But delayed gratification isn't just about resisting temptation. It's about reframing time itself. Most people think in terms of immediate costs and immediate benefits. When you force yourself to be consistent, you're training yourself to think in terms of immediate costs and future benefits. You're learning to value outcomes that exist only in potential rather than reality. This shift in temporal perspective is transformational because it changes how you evaluate every decision. Instead of asking, "What will make me feel good right now?" you ask, "What will make me glad I did this a year from now?" Instead of optimizing for immediate comfort, you optimize for long-term satisfaction. Instead of choosing what's easy, you choose what's effective. The discipline of delayed gratification becomes easier when you understand the mathematics of compounding. Small sacrifices made consistently over time create exponentially larger rewards than large indulgences enjoyed sporadically. The daily choice to work instead of rest compounds into expertise. The daily choice to save instead of spend compounds into wealth. The daily choice to grow instead of comfort compounds into transformation. But perhaps the most important aspect of delayed gratification is its impact on identity. When you consistently choose long-term benefits over short-term pleasures, you're not just changing your outcomes, you're changing who you are. You become someone who values substance over satisfaction, growth over comfort, achievement over entertainment. This identity shift makes future delayed gratification easier because it aligns with who you've become. The challenge is that delayed gratification requires you to believe in rewards you can't yet see. You have to have faith that your consistent efforts will eventually pay off. You have to trust that your sacrifices are investments rather than losses. You have to maintain conviction in outcomes that exist only in your imagination and your planning. This faith is easier to maintain when you understand the difference between sacrifice and investment. Sacrifice implies loss, something given up never to be recovered. Investment implies exchange, something given up to receive something better later. When you force yourself to be consistent, you're not sacrificing immediate pleasure. You're investing it in future satisfaction. The most effective way to strengthen your delayed gratification muscle is through progressive training. You start with small delays and gradually increase them. You postpone small pleasures to build your tolerance for postponing larger ones. You practice saying no to immediate rewards so you can say yes to ultimate rewards. This training might involve simple exercises like waiting 5 minutes before checking your phone, finishing one task before starting another, or saving money for 1 month before making a purchase. These small practices build your capacity for larger delays like completing a degree, building a business, or transforming your health. The key insight about delayed gratification is that it becomes easier with practice, not harder. Most people think that resisting temptation depletes willpower, making future resistance more difficult. But research shows that people who regularly practice delayed gratification actually become better at it over time. Their capacity increases rather than decreases. This happens because delayed gratification is a skill, not a finite resource. Like physical strength, it grows with exercise. Every time you choose long-term benefits over short-term pleasures, you're building your delayed gratification muscle. Every time you force yourself to be consistent despite immediate discomfort, you're increasing your capacity for future consistency. Advanced practitioners of delayed gratification develop what could be called temporal intelligence. They become expert at evaluating the long-term consequences of short-term decisions. They can accurately predict how current choices will impact future outcomes. They understand the compound effects of both positive and negative behaviors. This temporal intelligence allows them to make decisions that seem illogical to short-term thinkers but are obviously correct to long-term thinkers. They work when others rest because they understand that work compounds into expertise. They save when others spend because they understand that savings compound into wealth. They grow when others comfort because they understand that growth compounds into transformation. The ultimate expression of delayed gratification mastery is reaching a point where long-term thinking becomes automatic. You don't have to force yourself to think about future consequences. You naturally evaluate decisions through the lens of long-term impact. You intuitively choose options that serve your future self rather than your current self. When this happens, forcing yourself to be consistent stops feeling like force. It starts feeling like wisdom. You're not fighting against your nature. You're expressing your nature as someone who understands that the best things in life come to those who are willing to wait, work, and remain consistent over time. Chapter 10. The Silent Power of Unnoticed Progress. The most profound transformations happen in silence. They occur in moments when no one is watching. During periods when progress feels invisible through actions that seem insignificant to outside observers, when you force yourself to be consistent, you're entering a realm where the most powerful changes happen below the surface, accumulating momentum that will eventually burst into undeniable results. This invisible progress is where most people lose faith. They force themselves to be consistent for days, weeks, or even months without seeing dramatic external changes. They expect their efforts to be immediately visible, their progress to be constantly obvious, their growth to be continuously apparent. When this doesn't happen, they conclude that their consistency isn't working and abandon their efforts just before the breakthrough. But the greatest achievements in human history were built during these periods of invisible progress. The scientist works for years before making the discovery that changes everything. The artist practices for decades before creating the masterpiece that defines their legacy. The entrepreneur builds for months before reaching the tipping point that creates exponential growth. The most important work happens when no one else can see it. Understanding this principle changes everything about how you approach consistency. You stop measuring your success by immediate results and start measuring it by process integrity. You stop looking for external validation and start trusting internal commitment. You stop needing visible progress and start having faith in invisible momentum. This shift is liberating because it removes the pressure to produce immediate results. You can focus entirely on the process of forcing yourself to be consistent without being distracted by the anxiety of visible outcomes. You understand that your job is not to create immediate results. Your job is to trust the process and let the results emerge naturally over time. The power of unnoticed progress lies in its compound nature. Each day of consistency might seem insignificant in isolation, but these days accumulate into weeks, months, and years of sustained effort. Like water slowly carving through stone, your daily actions are creating changes that are invisible until they become undeniable. Consider the person learning a new skill. For the first weeks or months, their progress feels frustratingly slow. They force themselves to practice consistently, but don't see dramatic improvement. They might even feel like they're getting worse as they become more aware of their limitations. But beneath the surface, neural pathways are forming, muscle memory is developing, and expertise is accumulating. Then suddenly, seemingly overnight, everything clicks. The skill that felt impossible becomes natural. The practice that felt forced becomes effortless. The progress that felt absent becomes obvious. This breakthrough didn't happen suddenly. It was the culmination of all those invisible days of consistent effort finally reaching critical mass. This pattern repeats in every area of life where consistency matters. Physical fitness builds slowly and invisibly until suddenly you notice strength, endurance, or flexibility that wasn't there before. Knowledge accumulates gradually and imperceptibly until suddenly you realize you've become expert in your field. Relationships deepen slowly and quietly until suddenly you have bonds that feel unbreakable. The challenge is maintaining faith during the invisible period. This requires a different kind of measuring system than most people use. Instead of measuring results, you measure effort. Instead of tracking outcomes, you track consistency. Instead of evaluating success by external metrics, you evaluate it by internal integrity. This internal measurement system is crucial because it's the only measurement system you completely control. You can't control when results will appear, but you can control whether you show up. You can't determine when breakthroughs will happen, but you can determine whether you maintain consistency. You can't guarantee external outcomes, but you can guarantee internal commitment. When you base your self-worth and progress assessment on factors you control rather than factors you don't control, you become unshakable. External circumstances can't derail your confidence because your confidence is based on your behavior, not your results. Setbacks can't destroy your momentum, because your momentum is based on your consistency, not your success rate. The silent power of unnoticed progress also protects you from the dangers of early success. When progress is visible and dramatic, it's easy to become overconfident and reduce effort. But when progress is invisible and gradual, you maintain the humility and work ethic that created the progress in the first place. You continue forcing yourself to be consistent because you understand that the work itself is the reward. This understanding creates what could be called process addiction rather than outcome addiction. You become addicted to the daily practice of consistency rather than the sporadic experience of success. You find satisfaction in showing up rather than just in achieving. You derive energy from effort rather than just from results. Process addiction is sustainable in a way that outcome addiction never can be. Outcomes are intermittent and unpredictable, but process is daily and dependable. When you're addicted to the process of forcing yourself to be consistent, you never run out of opportunities for satisfaction. Every day provides another chance to experience the deep fulfillment that comes from honoring your commitments. Regardless of external feedback, the most sophisticated practitioners of consistency learn to find evidence of progress in places others don't think to look. They measure their growing capacity to handle difficulty. They track their increasing ability to work without motivation. They notice their expanding tolerance for delayed gratification. They celebrate their deepening commitment to long-term thinking. These internal metrics are often more important than external metrics because they predict future external success. The person who is building consistency muscle is building the foundation for all future achievements. The person who is developing discipline is creating the capacity for extraordinary accomplishments. The person who is strengthening commitment is establishing the character that produces lasting results. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of unnoticed progress is that it creates what could be called earned confidence. This is different from borrowed confidence, which comes from external validation, or false confidence, which comes from self-deception. Earned confidence comes from the accumulated evidence of your own reliability, your own capability, your own willingness to force yourself to be consistent regardless of circumstances. This earned confidence is unshakable because it's based on behavioral evidence rather than emotional conviction. You know you can handle challenges because you've handled them before. You know you can maintain consistency because you've maintained it before. You know you can achieve your goals because you've proven your willingness to do what achievement requires. When you understand the silent power of unnoticed progress, you stop needing external recognition for your efforts. You stop requiring immediate feedback for your actions. You stop demanding visible results for your consistency. You find deep satisfaction in the knowledge that you're building something significant, even if no one else can see it yet. This inner satisfaction sustains you through the inevitable periods when motivation is low, when obstacles are high, and when progress feels non-existent. You continue forcing yourself to be consistent, not because you see dramatic results, but because you understand that the most powerful results are being created in the silence, in the darkness, in the spaces between effort and achievement where real transformation occurs. Chapter 11. The Transformation Point. There comes a moment in every consistency journey when forcing yourself stops feeling like force. When showing up stops requiring willpower. When consistency stops being something you do and starts being something you are. This is the transformation point, and reaching it is the ultimate goal of anyone who commits to forcing themselves to be consistent over time. The transformation point doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It arrives quietly, almost imperceptibly. One day, you realize that you're no longer fighting against yourself to maintain your commitments. You're not wrestling with resistance every morning. You're not negotiating with yourself about whether to show up. You simply show up because that's who you've become. This transformation is profound because it represents a fundamental shift in your relationship with consistency. In the beginning, consistency feels external, something imposed upon your natural inclinations. But after crossing the transformation point, consistency feels internal, something that flows from your deepest identity. You don't force yourself to be consistent because you don't need to force yourself anymore. Most people never reach this point because they quit during what could be called the grinding phase. This is the period between starting your consistency journey and reaching the transformation point. During this phase, every day requires conscious effort. Every action demands willpower. Every commitment feels like a battle between your current self and your future self. The grinding phase is where discipline is built, where character is forged, where the foundation for transformation is laid. But it's also where most people lose faith because the effort feels disproportionate to the visible results. They're putting in maximum effort for minimum obvious return, not understanding that they're actually building the momentum that will eventually make effort feel effortless. The length of the grinding phase varies by person and by goal, but it typically lasts much longer than people expect. Research suggests that habit formation takes anywhere from 18 days to 254 days with an average of 66 days. But true transformation, the kind that makes forcing yourself unnecessary, often takes much longer because it involves deeper changes than just behavioral habit formation. During the grinding phase, you're not just building habits. You're rewiring neural pathways, reshaping identity, accumulating momentum, developing systems, and strengthening the psychological muscles that make consistency sustainable. These changes happen slowly and often invisibly, which is why the grinding phase tests your faith more than your ability. The key to surviving the grinding phase is understanding that it's temporary. The effort you're putting in now is an investment in a future where that same effort won't be required. You're working hard now so you won't have to work as hard later. You're forcing yourself to be consistent now so that consistency becomes natural later. Signs that you're approaching the transformation point include noticing that consistency requires less conscious effort, feeling uncomfortable when you miss your commitments, finding that your routines feel natural rather than forced, and experiencing genuine satisfaction from the process rather than just the results. These indicators suggest that the internal changes are reaching critical mass. The transformation point represents the moment when your new identity fully integrates. The person who forces themselves to be consistent becomes the person who is naturally consistent. The external discipline becomes internal character. The imposed structure becomes genuine preference. You've literally become a different person through the power of sustained forced consistency. But crossing the transformation point doesn't mean your consistency journey is over. It means you've graduated from forcing consistency to maintaining consistency. The daily effort continues, but it feels different because it's no longer forced. It's chosen, embraced, and celebrated as an expression of who you've become rather than a requirement for who you want to become. Understanding the transformation point changes how you approach the grinding phase. Instead of expecting immediate ease, you prepare for temporary difficulty. Instead of being discouraged by the effort required, you're encouraged by the transformation it's creating. Instead of questioning whether the struggle is worth it, you trust that the struggle is building something extraordinary. The transformation point also explains why some people can maintain consistency that seems impossible to others. They're not superhuman. They're not more disciplined. They're not more motivated. They've simply crossed the transformation point where consistency feels natural rather than forced. What looks like extraordinary discipline to outside observers feels like ordinary behavior to them. This is why the most consistent people often don't think of themselves as disciplined. They're just being themselves. They're expressing their identity rather than overcoming their nature. They've reached the point where forcing themselves to be consistent has transformed them into people who don't need to be forced. Chapter 12. Beyond individual success. When you master the art of forcing yourself to be consistent, something unexpected happens. Your transformation extends beyond personal achievement into something larger and more meaningful. You become a force for positive change in the lives of others. Not through preaching or teaching, but through the simple power of example. Your consistency becomes a beacon that guides others toward their own transformation. This ripple effect happens naturally because consistency is rare and magnetic. In a world where most people struggle with follow-through, someone who consistently does what they say they'll do stands out dramatically. People notice, they're inspired. They start to believe that maybe they too can force themselves to be consistent and create meaningful change in their lives. Your influence begins in your immediate circle. Family members see your commitment and start questioning their own excuses. Friends observe your discipline and begin to re-evaluate their priorities. Colleagues witness your reliability and start to raise their own standards. Without saying a word about consistency, you're teaching everyone around you what's possible when someone commits to forcing themselves to show up regardless of circumstances. This silent leadership is the most powerful form of influence because it's based on action rather than words. You're not telling people to be consistent. You're showing them what consistency looks like. You're not convincing them to change. You're demonstrating that change is possible. You're not motivating them to be better. You're proving that being better is achievable through simple sustained effort. But the impact extends beyond inspiration. Your consistency creates opportunities for others to be consistent too. When you show up reliably, others can depend on you, which makes it easier for them to show up reliably as well. When you maintain high standards, others feel permission to maintain high standards too. When you refuse to make excuses, others find it harder to justify their own excuses. This creates what could be called consistency contagion. Not the forced spreading of behavior, but the natural attraction to excellence that happens when someone demonstrates what's possible through sustained effort. People want to be around consistent people because consistency creates stability, predictability, and growth. These qualities are magnetic in a world full of chaos and uncertainty. Your journey from forcing yourself to be consistent to becoming naturally consistent also provides a roadmap for others. They can see that transformation is possible because they witnessed yours. They understand that the struggle is temporary because they observed your breakthrough. They know that the effort is worth it because they've seen your results. This modeling effect is particularly powerful because it's authentic. You're not teaching from theory. You're sharing from experience. You're not promoting concepts you've read about. You're demonstrating principles you've lived. Your credibility comes not from credentials, but from character, not from knowledge, but from practice. The most profound impact happens when you realize that your consistency journey was never just about you. It was about becoming the person who could influence positive change in others. It was about developing the character that could inspire transformation in your community. It was about building the strength that could support others in their own consistency journeys. This realization shifts your motivation from purely personal to fundamentally altruistic. You continue forcing yourself to be consistent, not just for your own benefit, but because you understand that your consistency gives others permission to be consistent too. Your discipline creates space for others to be disciplined. Your commitment encourages others to make commitments. When your consistency extends beyond individual success, it becomes a form of service. You're serving your family by modeling reliability. You're serving your community by demonstrating what's possible. You're serving future generations by creating examples they can follow. Your daily choice to force yourself to be consistent becomes a gift to everyone whose life you touch. This service aspect of consistency is often what sustains people through the most difficult periods. When personal motivation wavers, purpose-driven motivation remains strong. When individual benefits feel insufficient, collective impact feels meaningful. When forcing yourself to be consistent feels hard, doing it for others feels worthwhile. The legacy you create through consistency isn't measured just in personal achievements. It's measured in the number of people who found courage to change because they witnessed your transformation. It's calculated in the lives that improved because someone demonstrated that improvement was possible. It's valued in the potential that was unleashed because you showed others what sustained effort could accomplish. This understanding transforms the grinding phase from a period of self-focused struggle into a period of character development that will serve others. Every day you force yourself to be consistent. You're not just building your own future. You're creating a foundation for influencing positive change in the lives of everyone you encounter. When you reach this level of understanding, forcing yourself to be consistent stops being about personal discipline and starts being about contribution. You maintain your commitments not just because they serve your goals, but because they serve a larger purpose. You show up not just for yourself, but for everyone who needs an example of what's possible. When someone refuses to quit. Chapter 13. The philosophy of unshakable commitment at the deepest level. Forcing yourself to be consistent is a philosophical stance about what it means to be human. It's a declaration that you believe human beings are capable of transcending their immediate impulses in service of their highest aspirations. It's a statement that character matters more than comfort, that integrity trumps convenience, and that commitment is the foundation upon which all meaningful achievement is built. This philosophy separates those who achieve extraordinary results from those who settle for ordinary outcomes. It's not about talent, intelligence, or circumstances. It's about your fundamental beliefs regarding human potential and personal responsibility. When you truly believe that humans can force themselves to be consistent regardless of feelings, you unlock capabilities that remain hidden to those who believe consistency depends on favorable conditions. Unshakable commitment is built on the understanding that your word to yourself is sacred. When you make a commitment, you're creating a sacred contract between your current self and your future self. Breaking this contract isn't just about missing a goal or failing to complete a task. It's about violating the trust that exists between who you are and who you're becoming. This philosophy requires you to elevate commitment above comfort. Most people prioritize feeling good over doing good, being comfortable over being consistent, avoiding difficulty over embracing growth. But when you adopt the philosophy of unshakable commitment, you reverse these priorities. You choose commitment over comfort because you understand that comfort is temporary but character is permanent. The philosophy also demands radical personal responsibility. You can't blame circumstances for your inconsistency because you've committed to being consistent regardless of circumstances. You can't point to external factors as excuses because you've accepted that external factors are irrelevant to internal commitment. You take complete ownership of your consistency because you understand that ownership is the price of freedom. This level of responsibility is initially intimidating because it removes all external sources of blame. You can no longer point to other people, unfortunate events, or difficult circumstances as reasons for inconsistency. You must confront the reality that your consistency depends entirely on your choices, your commitment, and your character. But this intimidation transforms into liberation when you realize that complete responsibility means complete power. If your consistency depends entirely on factors within your control, then your consistency is entirely achievable. You don't have to wait for better circumstances. You don't have to hope for external support. You don't have to depend on favorable conditions. You simply have to choose. The philosophy of unshakable commitment also recognizes that consistency is fundamentally about respect. Respect for your future self, respect for your goals, respect for your potential, and respect for the process of growth and achievement. When you force yourself to be consistent, you're honoring these relationships and acknowledging their importance in your life. This respect extends to understanding that your commitments are not suggestions or preferences. They're non-negotiable promises that define your integrity. When you say you'll do something, you'll do it. Regardless of how you feel when the time comes to act, this isn't rigidity. It's reliability. It's not stubbornness, it's strength. The philosophy also embraces the paradox that forcing yourself leads to freedom. By constraining your behavior through consistent commitments, you actually expand your possibilities. By limiting your choices in the moment, you maximize your options in the future. By accepting the discipline of consistency, you create the freedom that comes from achieved goals and realized potential. This paradox is difficult for many people to understand because they equate freedom with the absence of constraints. But true freedom isn't the ability to do whatever you want in the moment. True freedom is the capability to create the life you actually want through sustained, consistent effort over time. Understanding this paradox changes your relationship with discipline entirely. Discipline stops feeling like restriction and starts feeling like investment. Consistency stops feeling like limitation and starts feeling like liberation. Forcing yourself stops feeling like oppression and starts feeling like empowerment. The philosophy of unshakable commitment ultimately rests on a simple but profound truth. You become what you consistently do. If you consistently make excuses, you become someone who makes excuses. If you consistently avoid difficulty, you become someone who avoids difficulty. But if you consistently force yourself to honor your commitments, you become someone who can be absolutely trusted, especially by yourself. This transformation of identity through consistent action is the ultimate expression of human potential. It demonstrates that we are not prisoners of our circumstances, slaves to our impulses, or victims of our conditioning. We are architects of our own character, capable of designing and building the person we want to become through the daily practice of unshakable commitment. When you fully embrace this philosophy, forcing yourself to be consistent stops feeling like an external requirement and starts feeling like an internal expression. You're not forcing yourself because you have to. You're forcing yourself because it's who you are. You're not being consistent to achieve specific goals. You're being consistent because consistency is the highest expression of your values and your potential. Chapter 14. The Mastery of Self-Reliance. The ultimate destination of learning to force yourself to be consistent is complete self-reliance. Not the isolation that comes from rejecting help or the arrogance that comes from believing you need no one, but the deep confidence that comes from knowing you can depend on yourself regardless of external circumstances. This self-reliance is the foundation of all sustainable success and the source of unshakable inner peace. Self-reliance through consistency means you're no longer at the mercy of external factors for your performance, your motivation, or your progress. You don't need perfect conditions to do excellent work. You don't require external motivation to take important action. You don't depend on other people's approval to maintain your commitments. You've become your own source of energy, direction, and accountability. This transformation happens gradually as you repeatedly prove to yourself that you can force yourself to be consistent even when it's difficult. Each time you show up when you don't feel like it, you're building evidence that you're reliable. Each time you maintain your commitments despite obstacles, you're strengthening your trust in your own character. Each time you follow through when it would be easier to quit, you're developing the deep confidence that comes from self-proven capability. The mastery of self-reliance through consistency creates what could be called emotional independence. Your emotional state becomes less dependent on external events and more dependent on internal alignment. You feel good not because things are going well, but because you're living in integrity with your commitments. You feel confident not because others approve of you, but because you approve of yourself based on your actions. This emotional independence is liberating because it removes the anxiety that comes from depending on factors beyond your control. You're no longer worried about what others think because your self-worth is based on your consistency, not their opinions. You're no longer stressed about external circumstances because your success is based on your actions, not your situation. Self-reliant people who have mastered consistency also develop what could be called strategic patience. They understand that meaningful results take time and they're willing to invest consistent effort for as long as necessary to achieve their goals. They don't need immediate gratification because they've learned to find satisfaction in the process of consistent action itself. This patience is strategic rather than passive because it's combined with relentless daily action. Self-reliant people don't wait for results. They create results through consistent effort while maintaining the patience to allow those results to compound over time. They force themselves to be consistent in the present while trusting the process to deliver outcomes in the future. The mastery of self-reliance also includes the ability to make difficult decisions without external validation. When you've proven to yourself that you can maintain consistency regardless of circumstances, you develop confidence in your judgment and your capability. You can choose challenging paths because you trust your ability to stay consistent even when those paths become difficult. This decision-making confidence extends to every area of life. You can commit to ambitious goals because you know you'll force yourself to pursue them consistently. You can make sacrifices for long-term benefits because you trust your ability to maintain delayed gratification. You can choose growth over comfort because you've proven that you can handle discomfort consistently. Perhaps the most important aspect of self-reliance mastery is the development of internal validation systems. Instead of seeking approval from others, you validate yourself based on your integrity with your commitments. Instead of measuring success by external metrics alone, you measure it by your consistency with your values and goals. Instead of depending on external recognition, you recognize yourself for the daily choice to force yourself to be consistent. These internal validation systems are crucial because they make you immune to the fickleness of external feedback. Others might not notice your consistency, appreciate your efforts, or understand your sacrifices, but their awareness or approval becomes irrelevant because you have a reliable internal system for recognizing and celebrating your commitment to consistency. The self-reliant person who has mastered consistency becomes what could be called a force of nature. Not destructive or uncontrollable, but unstoppable and dependable. They become someone others can rely on because they first become someone they can rely on themselves. They develop the kind of character that creates opportunities, attracts resources, and inspires confidence in others. This reliability makes them magnetic to other successful people because successful people value consistency above almost everything else. They want to partner with people who will follow through. Invest in people who will persist and associate with people who will honor their commitments. Self-reliance through consistency becomes a passport to opportunities that are invisible to inconsistent people. The mastery of self-reliance through forced consistency also creates what could be called contribution capacity. When you no longer need external support to maintain your own consistency, you develop surplus energy and capability that can be used to support others. You become someone who can be depended upon not just for your own success, but for contributing to the success of others. This contribution capacity is the ultimate expression of self-reliance because it demonstrates that you've moved beyond mere self-sufficiency into genuine self-mastery. You're not just capable of taking care of yourself. You're capable of taking care of others. You're not just consistent for your own benefit. You're consistent in service of larger purposes and greater goods. When you reach this level of self-reliance through consistency, you've achieved something remarkable. You've become someone who can be absolutely trusted to do what they say they'll do. Someone who can be completely relied upon to show up regardless of circumstances, and someone who can be entirely counted on to persist until their commitments are fulfilled. This is the mastery of self-reliance, and it's the ultimate reward for learning to force yourself to be consistent. Chapter 15: The Legacy of Consistency. The final chapter of forcing yourself to be consistent isn't about you at all. It's about what you leave behind. It's about the impact of your transformation on the generations that follow. It's about understanding that your daily choice to be consistent creates ripples that extend far beyond your individual life and into the future of everyone whose life you touch. Legacy is not something that happens after you're gone. Legacy is something you build every single day through your choices, your actions, and your character. Every time you force yourself to be consistent when it would be easier to quit, you're not just changing your life. You're creating an example that others can follow, a standard that others can aspire to, and a proof that transformation is possible for anyone willing to commit to the process. The legacy of consistency begins with the people closest to you. Your family members observe your transformation and begin to believe that they too can change. Your children see your commitment and learn that promises matter, that goals are achievable, and that character is built through daily choices. Your friends witness your discipline and start to question their own excuses and limitations. This modeling effect extends through generations because character traits are often inherited not genetically but culturally. Children who grow up watching consistent parents are more likely to become consistent adults. Students who learn from consistent teachers are more likely to develop consistent habits. Employees who work for consistent leaders are more likely to demonstrate consistent performance. Your legacy of consistency also influences your professional sphere. Colleagues who work with you learn what reliability looks like. Clients who depend on you discover what trustworthiness means. Partners who collaborate with you experience what genuine commitment feels like. You become a standard of excellence that raises the expectations and performance of everyone in your professional network. But the most profound aspect of the legacy you create through consistency is how it changes the narrative about what's possible. In a world where most people struggle with follow-through, where excuses are common and commitment is rare, your example becomes proof that human beings can transcend their limitations through sustained effort. You become living evidence that transformation is achievable not just theoretically but practically. This narrative change is crucial because it gives others permission to attempt their own transformations. When people see someone they know personally force themselves to be consistent and achieve remarkable results, it becomes real to them in a way that distant examples or theoretical possibilities never could. You make the extraordinary feel achievable because you've achieved it yourself. The legacy of consistency also includes the systems, processes, and wisdom you develop during your transformation journey. The methods you create for forcing yourself to be consistent become tools that others can adapt and use. The insights you gain about human psychology, habit formation, and character development become knowledge that can be shared and applied by others facing similar challenges. Perhaps most importantly, your legacy includes the expansion of what people believe is possible for themselves. When you demonstrate that someone can force themselves to be consistent despite difficulties, despite setbacks, despite all the normal human tendencies toward comfort and convenience, you expand the horizon of possibility for everyone who witnesses your journey. This expansion is not just inspirational, it's educational. People learn from your example that consistency is a choice, not a talent. They discover that discipline can be developed, not just inherited. They understand that character can be built, not just hoped for. These lessons become part of their knowledge base and inform their own attempts at transformation. The legacy of consistency is also built through the specific achievements that your consistency makes possible. The business you build through consistent effort creates jobs for others. The health you maintain through consistent habits extends your ability to serve others. The skills you develop through consistent practice enable you to contribute more effectively to your community. These achievements are important not just for their immediate impact but for their demonstration effect. They show others what becomes possible when someone commits to forcing themselves to be consistent over time. They provide concrete evidence that the temporary discomfort of consistency pays dividends that extend far beyond personal benefit. Your legacy also includes the culture of consistency you create wherever you have influence. Organizations where you work become more reliable. Teams you join become more committed. Communities you participate in become more disciplined. Your presence and example raise the standards and expectations of entire groups of people. This cultural impact is often the most lasting aspect of your legacy because it becomes self-perpetuating. When you create a culture of consistency, that culture continues to influence new people long after your direct involvement ends. The standards you establish become the new normal. The expectations you model become the baseline for others. The ultimate legacy of learning to force yourself to be consistent is the demonstration that human potential is far greater than most people believe through your transformation. You prove that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary results through sustained effort. You show that anyone can change, anyone can grow, and anyone can become the person they want to be if they're willing to force themselves to be consistent. This demonstration becomes part of human history. A small but significant addition to the collective evidence that people can transcend their circumstances through character and commitment. Your story joins the countless other stories of individuals who decided to force themselves to be consistent and discovered that this decision changed not just their lives but the lives of everyone around them. When you understand that your consistency creates a legacy that extends far beyond your individual achievements, it transforms your motivation from personal to universal. You maintain your commitments not just for your own benefit, but for the benefit of everyone who needs an example of what's possible. You force yourself to be consistent, not just to achieve your goals, but to expand the realm of possibility for others. This is the ultimate meaning of forcing yourself to be consistent. It's not just about personal success. It's about human potential. It's not just about individual achievement. It's about collective inspiration. It's not just about your transformation. It's about creating proof that transformation is possible for anyone willing to make the daily choice to force themselves to be consistent. Regardless of how they feel, regardless of their circumstances, and regardless of how long it takes, your legacy of consistency becomes a gift to the future. Evidence that human beings can choose character over comfort, commitment over convenience, and long-term vision over short-term pleasure. And in the end, this gift may be the most important thing you ever accomplish.